everyone. We're starting Module 6, where we will cover the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system, together with the immune system, they're going to be closely related to the cardiovascular system. Therefore, the main function of the lymphatic system is to return the excess tissue fluid back to the blood vascular system. And the lymphatic vessels will collect this fluid and transport it to the bloodstream. Now, the immune system will protect our bodies from the foreign organisms by fighting the infections and by trying to clear up certain diseases. Therefore, you can imagine that the lymphatic and the immune structures are of utmost importance to students that are entering the health professions because, as we will see, the lymphatic vessels, they will provide a route by which the disease organisms, they travel throughout the body, and the lymphoid tissues and organs, they will function to contain and destroy these organisms. So let's get started in our first learning outcome, where we will be talking about the functions of the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system, or also called lymphoid system, it has several components: the lymph, the lymphatic vessels, and the lymphocytes. The lymph is going to be the fluid connective tissue that's going to be transported and also monitored by this system. The vessels that carry the lymph are called the lymphatic vessels, and the cells that are going to be suspended within this fluid are known as the lymphocytes. So specialized lymphoid tissues and lymphoid organs, they will adjust the composition of the lymph and produce lymphocytes of various kinds, which we will cover in this module. Now, lymphoid tissues, they are collectively called MALT, which basically means mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, and those are part of the digestive tract. Within the lymphoid organs, we have the lymph nodes, the thymus, and the spleen. And on this image, we can see the tonsils, which are one of the components of the lymphoid tissue. And we can also see all of the lymphoid organs represented on the image as well. So here's the spleen, which is located on the left side of the body, right behind the stomach. Then we have the thymus, which is located anterior to the heart. And then we have this network of lymph nodes that are spread throughout the body. And we will cover them in more details when we get to those learning outcomes. Now, the lymphoid vessels, they do originate in the peripheral tissues, and they will deliver the lymph that travels through them into the venous system. Now, the lymph will consist of three main things: interstitial fluid, lymphocytes, and macrophages. The interstitial fluid, it will resemble the blood plasma, but with a lower concentration of proteins. The lymphocytes are going to be the cells that are going to be responsible for the immune response. And we did talk already about lymphocytes when we were talking about the blood. Remember, that was module 2. And the macrophages, there are going to be several different types of macrophages, and we will talk about those as well. Now, the lymphatic vessels, they often begin within or they pass through the lymphoid tissues and the lymphoid organs, which are structures that contain a large number of lymphocytes, macrophages, and in many cases, lymphoid stem cells. So it makes sense that these lymphatic vessels are going to be circulating through these lymphoid tissues and lymphoid organs, as they will be carrying all these different types of cells. Now, lymphoid tissues and lymphoid organs, they are classified as either primary or secondary lymphoid structures. Primary can also be called central lymphoid structures. They're going to be responsible for the development and the maturation of lymphocytes, and they can contain the stem cells that will divide to produce daughter cells that will then differentiate into either B cells, T cells, or NK cells, which are the natural killer cells. And we will talk more about these cells in the next few slides. Now, the bone marrow and the thymus of the adult are considered primary lymphoid structures. However, most of the immune response begins in the secondary or peripheral lymphoid structures, where there's going to be an activation of the lymphocytes that will divide to produce additional lymphocytes of the same type. So, for example, the divisions of the activated B cells, they can produce the additional B cells that are needed to fight off an infection. Now, the secondary lymphoid structures are located at the front lines where you're going to have invading bacteria, for example, and these are going to be encountered first at the secondary lymphoid structures. An example of these secondary lymphoid structures include the lymph nodes and the tonsils, in addition to the spleen, for example. Let's talk first about three main functions of the lymphatic system. The first one is where the lymphatic system will produce, maintain, and distribute lymphocytes. So the lymphocytes, which are these essential to the normal defense mechanism of the body, they're going to be produced and stored within the lymphoid organs, such as the spleen, the thymus, and the bone marrow. And we have already seen that the thymus and the bone marrow are considered primary lymphoid structures, and the spleen is actually considered a secondary lymphoid structure. A second function of the lymphatic system is that it will maintain the normal blood volume as it eliminates local variations in the chemical composition of the interstitial fluid. So how is this going to happen? Well, the blood pressure at the proximal end of the systemic capillary, which is represented here on this image, is approximately 35 millimeters of mercury. And the blood pressure, it tends to force the water and the solutes out of the plasma, therefore out of the blood vessels and into the interstitial fluid. So there's a small net movement of fluid from the plasma into the interstitial fluid along every systemic capillary. The total volume is actually very substantial. In fact, approximately 3.6 liters, which is about 72% of the total blood volume, will enter the interstitial fluid each day. And under normal circumstances, this movement goes actually unnoticed because each day the lymphatic vessels actually return an equal volume of interstitial fluid back into the bloodstream. So consequently, there is a continual movement of fluid from the bloodstream into the tissues and then back to the bloodstream through the lymphatic vessels. And this circulation of fluid actually helps eliminate the regional differences in the composition of the interstitial fluid. And because so much fluid moves through the lymphatic system each day, if you have a break in a major lymphatic vessel, this can cause a rapid and potentially fatal decline in blood volume because you won't have that fluid from the interstitial space going back into the bloodstream. And the next and last function is to provide an alternative route for the transport of hormones, nutrients, and waste products. For example, there are certain lipids that are absorbed by the digestive tract and that are carried to the bloodstream by the lymphatic vessels rather than by absorption across the capillary walls, because these lipids, if they're too big, they're hard to be absorbed by the small intestine. And we will talk about them in this module coming up.